So one of the main topics when we are creating games is basically collisions. Okay, so for example in this game we are detecting lots of collisions. For example, the one between the player and the platforms, the ones between the bullets and the enemies, between the enemy bullets and the player. Well, lots of stuff is going on right now. So how exactly are these collisions set up? How we can even take a step further? Because for example right now we only shoot one type of bullet, which is like a normal bullet that, for example, when colliding with a solid object, it is basically just destroyed. But what if we wanted to add some kind of laser, for example, that would trespass solid objects? So exactly in this video we want to level up and master a little bit our Godot collisions, okay, with lots of things that I'm sure that are going to be super important for you to know. And I want to demonstrate this with a Unity game that I created myself. And basically, in the way that I'm going to be teaching you collisions is super similar in Unity and in Godot. But I want to use this example for us to understand how handling collisions better can actually help us create better player experiences. So this is an RPG game that has pretty interesting collisions. Because, for example, here the weapons, as you can see, they don't behave as solid objects. They can trespass everything. For example, this knife, okay, cannot like collide directly with the obstacles, but the player or the enemies, for example, they can't trespass basically these obstacles. For example, the player is a solid object as well as the obstacles, okay, it cannot trespass the obstacles, but it can trespass the enemies, as you can see. And also enemies themselves, even though they cannot trespass obstacles, they can trespass from each other, okay? So let me actually try to do this. So let me move right here and you will see that this green guy, as you can see, it is moving on top of the kind of wizard that is over there. So to handle all this, what is used is basically here on the collision, okay? Collision, layer, and mask. So the definitions for this, or the usage, is quite simple. The collision layer, okay, is the exact collision layer in which the object is. In this case, for example, the player is in collision layer 1, and the mask is the collision layer, okay, in which this object is going to be looking forward to getting collisions. In this case, this specific Godot project, which is just a template, it doesn't have a setup in collision layers and masks. Because, well, there are many ways of handling collisions, okay? We are going to be, in this tutorial, by the way, handling collision layers and masks, of course. But if you want to see something a little bit more graphic, even though it's not inside of Godot, the way in which this works is quite similarly both in Unity and Godot. So if I go here to the project settings and I go to physics 2D, in this case in Unity it works as a layer collision matrix, and this is the exact same thing, okay? So for example, the player here can only collide with the enemy weapons themselves. It cannot collide with the player weapons themselves. It can collide with the tile map, but it can't collide with the enemy or with other players. If I turn this on, for example, the collision between player and the enemy, what is going to happen is that the player is going to behave as a solid object with the enemies as well. So it's going to kind of push them, okay? As you can see, or try to push them, okay? So as you can see, a force has been applied, so everything kind of breaks. So this is probably not the behavior that we want. But as you can see, the player is going to be pushing the enemies. So in Unity, okay, if you can see it here in this particular example, if we go to the player, here this is the layer over here, okay, the layer that this game object is in, this is the exact same thing that we have as the collision layer over here. The physics layer, this collision object 3D is in. And as you can see, the concept is the exact same one in both 2D and 3D, by the way. So collision layer is the exact same thing as we have here in this example, whereas the collision mask would be what we have over here. I do like how Unity structures this because it's much more visual, at least for me. So in this case, as we saw, every single object that is in the layer, in the collision layer player, we have these masks, okay, over here. It's going to collide with other enemy weapons, with the tile map, etc. So now that we have understand like the theory behind it, let's actually apply this. So in Godot by default, these collision layers don't have a name. They are just based on index layer 4, 9, well 5, 6, etc. So you can actually give them custom names. So if you go to physics 2D, okay, or sorry, over here we have to scroll down a little bit more. and over here layer names 2D or 3D physics in reality. Let's start giving these things names. So for example, let's create a physics layer for the player, another one for the enemy, a platform, and I believe that with this and also bullet we're going to be needing, for example. So right now, once again, every single object can collide with every single other object, okay, because all of them are in layer 1 and in mask 1, so everything can collide with each other. So we actually have to modify this, because for example, the player, let's go to the actual scene, let's go to collision. The player is correct, okay, that is in the collision layer player, but the player, with what objects can it collide? So it may not be able to collide with other players. In this game we only have one player, so we don't really care about this behavior. So the player, I want it to be able to collide with enemies, and we're going to be seeing this behavior right now. So right now the player is only able to collide with enemies, okay? So let's now go to the enemies themselves. So over here, enemy flying. And over here, let's set this up properly. So in collision layer, this is not in player, this is in enemy. And in mask, I want the enemy, okay, to also be able to receive collisions from the player. And by the way, you can press over here, okay, to just see the layers that you have changed the names. So it's going to be a little bit easier to assign them. And what happens, for example, when we play the game, is that our player is not detecting the collision with the platforms. And why is this exactly happening right now, even though we have not changed like the collision shape itself? So let's basically start analyzing this. So the player, okay, can only collide with, in this case, enemies. But what happens with these different platforms? So let's actually go here to the platforms. So I believe all of them are this exact same prefab, or at least these ones that are grass, because these ones are different. So let's go to these ones. Okay, and over here, in this case, we're going to be having to go to the static body, that is the actual collision, okay, object. And in layer, well, this is not correct, because this is not an enemy, this is a platform. And what should the platform be able to detect collisions with? So for example, with just the player. So now it should be working as expected. So when we press play, we should be detecting the collision. But what is happening is that the platform is able to collide with the player, but the player is not able to detect the collision with the platform. So here we have the player, and in the collision mask, we should also be able to collide with the platform itself, okay? So let's play again. And now it should basically have the exact same behavior, but as you can see, we kind of start to have more control over the collisions themselves. Because previously we weren't able to determine which objects would be able to actually collide with the platforms and which wouldn't be able to collide with the platforms. And I believe that with this simple explanation, you can start to see the actual potential of this. I have created, as you remember, a collision layer and mask called bullet, okay? Over here. So what you could have is, for example, two types of bullet. One type of bullet, okay, that for example is a solid bullet, as I explained at the very beginning, which collides with the wall, for example. So what would happen is that if I am, for example, over here, okay, or well, I was just killed, so let's go back. Maybe I don't know, I'm trying to look for an angle that, for example, over here, okay, and I shoot at this guy, okay. As you can see right now, the bullet should not be able to hit it, because it should be colliding with the platform in reality. So if you wanted to implement a laser game object, it would be quite simple, okay? I'm not going to be doing it right now because I saw that the player here is actually shooting with a raycast, so we will have to kind of modify this pretty long script, and I think it's not quite like a part of the tutorial. Once you understand the basics, you can do it on your own. But what you will do, for example, let's add over here an area 3D. So in your collision, what you would have is, well, you have your own bullet, but maybe you can also go to edit layer names and add another one, which would be laser, okay, and another one that is called walls, okay, or wall, just there, they are singular. So for the layer, it's going to be the laser, and the laser should only be able to collide with enemies, okay? So it's not going to care about walls and platforms, so it's going to be able to trespass them. Whereas on the other hand, if you were to just use an object to shoot the bullet instead of a raycast. That's why I mostly just prefer using objects rather than raycast, because I feel that you have much more control over, or it's easier at least to edit them. This would be a bullet, okay, and the bullet, what it would be able to collide with would be with the enemy and the platform and the wall. So it's going to be able to just, okay, if it has collided with the wall, as it is the default behavior, the bullet is going to be destroyed. It's not going to penetrate through the wall. And here you can start to see how, without having to directly modify the collision shapes, properties, or without having to do more complicated stuff, you can actually start to have much more control over your collisions in Godot, and actually have more control over what you want your game to have. In reality, in this game, for example, that is much more complete and actually has this system implemented, once again, it is the exact same thing, Unity and Godot. So if you understand it in Godot or in Unity, you're going to be able to understand it in the other engine. Here, the collision system, okay, I would have to kind of spend a lot of time explaining all these layers, but you can kind of start to see what this has here inside of it. So for example, the enemies can not deal damage to themselves. So if I were to enable this, the collision between the enemy and the enemy weapons, okay, which wouldn't make any sense, for example, what would happen is that enemies would deal damage to themselves. Maybe this breaks the game, I don't really know, but this would, as you can see, for example, take a look at this guy over here. It is dealing damage to its own. Also, animations are kind of breaking, okay, but well, you can kind of see what is happening. So of course, you can still probably get the same behavior via code, but it's much easier to have it like this, and it's much more visual. So there you have an example. Or for example here, the player in this code is not able to collide with player weapons, because if not, the player may be able to deal damage to its own, and that's something that we probably don't want. So for example here, when we are shooting the project, well, here this is not colliding with the player, but let me try to, no, I think it is going to be most impossible in this case, I believe, for the player to technically collide, okay, with its own. Well, here it is, yes. Here it is colliding with the play. No, it's not. It was an enemy's potion. But well, I believe that you can start to kind of understand the concept behind all this. And I don't want to overcomplicate it more than what it is, because it's much simpler. So in the types of games that I really recommend you take advantage of this is in games where you have some kind of physics implemented. And this is something quite complicated, that was quite complicated for me to understand at first, because I only like consider physics on my own mind as something that was bouncing around, or that there were forces applied all the time. And here there are no forces, but there are just physical collisions, okay? So for example here, the player is not able to move through it, because this is a solid object, okay? So in these cases in which you want to have, let's call them solid objects, okay, as in this RPG, as in the shooter, in those cases we have seen that handling collisions with collision masks and layers is pretty good, okay, to just have more control over how physics behave, because okay, players cannot move through it, but weapons can. They are not stopped, okay, by the obstacle. For example, also if projectiles are hit, okay, they just get destroyed. And if you actually want to learn Godot or even Unity, in the description down below you have access to my course, to my Godot course, which is right now just $23. And if you use the description link down below, you're going to be able to have a huge coupon code that is going to allow you to buy the course for something like $11-12. So enroll right now and learn Godot the right way. I'm going to see you there.